Diva walked into Dr. Raphael's office with firm steps, but her face bore an expression of accumulated fatigue. "Doctor, I'm exhausted. I can't say no to anyone and it's killing me." Dr. Raphael watched her closely. He had seen patients like Diva before, but something about her determination to seek help intrigued him. "Tell me more, Diva. When do you feel this difficulty?" The lawyer began to unburden herself. Always available, always ready to help, she found herself constantly swamped with extra work, family commitments, and even favors from acquaintances. "It's like I automatically say yes, even when I know I should say no." In the following sessions, Diva's story began to unfold. During her childhood, her mother would often scold her whenever she put her own needs first. One memory in particular haunted her. At the age of 9, Diva refused to help her mother with a household chore in order to study for a test. The response was an icy silence that lasted for days. Since then, she has never wanted to disappoint anyone again. "Diva, the guilt you feel is not yours. It is a reflection of a pattern you have learned. Let's work on this," Dr. Raphael said confidently. He proposed a simple challenge. Next week, Diva would have to say no to a small request, something that would not have major consequences. She tried. A colleague asked her to review a document at the end of the day. Diva opened her mouth to refuse, but before she knew it, she was saying, "Sure, I'll do it for you." Back in the office, she reported her failure. "I just can't do it, doctor. It feels like I'm going to disappoint everyone." Dr. Raphael smiled empathetically. "Let's change the approach. Instead of a blunt no, say something like, 'I would love to help, but right now I have something else to prioritize.'" The following week, Diva had a new opportunity. A friend asked for help with a last-minute move. Her heart racing, she replied, "I would love to help, but right now I have other commitments to take care of." To her surprise, her friend accepted her answer without drama. Diva began to apply the technique in other situations. Each small no was a victory. She realized that people were not rejecting her as she had feared, but rather they were more respectful of her boundaries. Gradually, she regained control of her schedule and rediscovered the pleasure of saying yes, only to what really mattered. Diva looked at Dr. Raphael with gratitude at the last session. "Doctor, I not only learned to say no, but also to prioritize myself. This has changed my life." Dr. Raphael smiled, satisfied. He knew that for many, the power of a simple no was the key to a lighter and more authentic life. Diva had always appeared to have it all together. As a renowned lawyer, she was admired for her competence, determination, and ability to manage multiple cases. However, behind her impeccable appearance and professional success, there was a woman who was exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely incapable of saying no. When she finally walked into Dr. Raphael's office, she was on the verge of a breakdown. "Doctor, I just don't know what to do anymore," she began as she slipped her purse over the handle and sat down with an expression of obvious exhaustion. "I say yes to everything and everyone, and it's killing me." Dr. Raphael, a seasoned psychologist with years of clinical practice, knew that Diva's journey was not unique. He had seen countless patients who, like her, lived imprisoned by the need to please others. But something about Diva caught his attention. Perhaps it was her mix of vulnerability and strength, or the fact that, despite everything, she was there, seeking help. "Diva," he said in his trademark calm, welcoming voice, "have you ever stopped to think about what's behind this behavior? What makes it so hard for you to say no?" Diva sighed deeply before answering. "I think it's because I feel like I'm letting people down, you know. If I say no, it's like I'm failing them. I can't stand the idea of being seen as selfish or insensitive." Thus, the first session was dedicated to understanding the origin of this dilemma. Diva explained how her routine had become a maze with no way out. At work, she took on extra tasks to help her colleagues, even when it meant working late into the night. At home, the dynamic was similar. She felt obligated to always be available for her family, ignoring her own needs. Even in social situations, she ended up giving in, like when she was invited to events she didn't want to attend, but accepted out of pure obligation. As the conversation flowed, Dr. Raphael began to outline Diva's profile. She was a perfectionist, accustomed to seeking approval from everyone around her, but the central issue was not just her inability to say no, but the emotional weight that this carried, the overwhelming guilt and fear of rejection. He knew that it would be necessary to approach this issue carefully, helping Diva to unravel the patterns that had led her to this point. At the end of the session, Dr. Raphael gave Diva a simple task: to observe the situations in which she said yes without meaning to, and to write down her feelings. She wasn't supposed to change anything yet, just to identify the moments when her automatic response kicked in. He knew that the first step to change was to become aware of the problem. Diva left the office with mixed feelings. On the one hand, she felt relieved to finally be able to share her difficulties. On the other, she didn't know if she would be able to face this challenge. However, something inside her began to change that day, a small spark of hope that perhaps it was possible to live a different life without the constant weight of obligation. If you want me to continue with the next items, with 700 words for each, let me know. Diva's journey has many rich aspects to be explored. The following week, Diva returned to Dr. Raphael's office. There was something different about her, a mix of her usual tiredness with a new restlessness, almost as if she wanted to solve everything at once, but didn't know where to start. "I watched what you asked for," she said, placing a small notebook on the table. "I wrote down every time you said yes, and doctor, it was scary. There was hardly a moment when I didn't give in." Dr. Raphael picked up the notebook and, as he flipped through it, he realized that Diva had meticulously detailed each situation, from the extra requests from her boss to the small demands of everyday life, like accepting invitations to dates she didn't want. The pattern was clear. Diva said yes, not because she wanted to, but because she feared the consequences of saying no. "Diva, you did a great job," he began. "Now tell me, how did you feel watching all of this?" She sighed and replied, "Horrible. It was like I was looking at myself from the outside, and I realized how much I put myself aside to please others. It was almost painful." Dr. Raphael nodded. He knew that this initial realization was essential to change. This pain, Diva, is the first step to understanding that something needs to change. But tell me, what was the most memorable situation for you this week? Diva hesitated before answering, but soon told me about a situation at work. Her boss, knowing that she was the solve my crisis type, asked her to take on an extra project with a tight deadline. She knew she was already overwhelmed, but she accepted anyway. "I didn't have the courage to say no," she confessed, her voice breaking. "And the worst part is that I kept asking myself, why did I do it again?" Dr. Raphael decided to dig deeper. "And why do you think you did it, Diva?" She was silent for a moment before answering, "I think I'm afraid. Afraid of appearing incompetent. Afraid of being rejected. It's as if saying no was a sign of weakness." That's when Dr. Raphael realized that the issue went beyond the simple difficulty in saying no. Diva associated the refusal with a threat to her identity, that of being someone reliable, strong, always willing to help. He knew he would need to help her deconstruct this narrative, enviar feedback penes, laterais, historico salvas. "Diva, I'm going to tell you something important," he said. "Saying no is not a sign of weakness. In fact, it's an act of respect to yourself and to others. But I understand that for you, this still seems like a distant idea." Diva nodded, but her look made it clear that she wasn't convinced. "So let's start with something simple," Dr. Raphael continued. "Next week I want you to try something new. When someone asks you for something that you really don't want or can't do, use a phrase that combines empathy with boundaries. For example, "I'd love to help, but right now I'm focused on another priority." Diva frowned. "Doctor, I don't know if I can do it. It sounds so easy when you say it like that, but when I do, I freeze up." "And that's why we're going to practice now," he replied, with an encouraging smile. They spent the rest of the session simulating everyday situations. Dr. Raphael became the boss, the colleague, the insistent friend. Each time Diva responded, he adjusted her sentence until it sounded natural and confident. By the end, she was a little more confident, though she still feared real-world application. By the third session, Diva seemed more introspective. She had tried to apply what she had learned, but realized that something deeper was holding her back. "I said no to a coworker this week," she began. "But it was horrible. I felt guilty the rest of the day. I even apologized." Dr. Raphael sensed that there was more to be explored. "Diva, this guilt, where do you feel it comes from?" She hesitated. "I think it comes from when I was a child. My mother always told me that I had to be helpful, that helping others was the right thing to do. One time, I told her I couldn't help her because I had to study, and she got so upset with me. I felt terrible. It was like a light bulb went on." Dr. Raphael knew that this memory was the root of the problem. He helped her revisit that memory, encouraging her to reflect on how her childhood lessons still influenced her. "Diva, you did the best you could back then, but you're not that kid anymore. You can make different choices now." Diva began to see how her difficulty saying no was connected to her search for approval and her fear of rejection. For the first time, she considered the possibility that her mother loved her, even when she set her own limits. The problem wasn't love, but the way she had interpreted events. With this new perspective, Diva felt that a small part of the weight she had been carrying had been lifted. She knew there was still work to be done, but she was beginning to understand that learning to say no without guilt was actually a way to free herself from the past. I can continue with the next chapters, detailing how Diva faced the practical challenge and the transformation that occurred in her life. Just ask. Diva entered the office at the next session with a slightly more relaxed expression, but still with the hesitation of someone who was unsure if she was on the right path. "Doctor, I tried to use the phrase we practiced. It was a little strange, but I managed it. I still felt guilty afterward." Dr. Raphael leaned forward slightly, as he always did, when he wanted his patients to feel completely heard. "And what was that moment like, Diva? Tell me in detail." She explained that during work hours, a colleague asked her to review a contract at the last minute, something he should have done himself. Diva felt the usual urge to say, "Sure," but this time she took a deep breath and replied, "I would love to help, but I need to finish an important report right now." To her surprise, her colleague accepted without question, simply saying, "Okay, I'll handle it another way." Diva was stunned. "Doctor, he didn't get angry, he didn't look at me funny, nothing, and yet I felt terrible. I kept thinking, does he think I'm untrustworthy? Will he avoid me now?" Dr. Raphael smiled, understanding the emotional complexity Diva was facing. "Diva, what you experienced is completely normal. Your brain is used to associating no with something negative, rejection, loss of approval, fear of disappointment. It's like a false alarm. It goes off because it thinks it's protecting you, but in reality there's no danger at all." He continued, now more firmly, "To change this, you need to keep practicing. The more times you can say no clearly and empathetically, the more your brain will understand that there are no terrible consequences. It's a process of re-education." Diva nodded, but still seemed hesitant. "What if, at some point, there really are bad consequences? What if I disappoint someone important?" Dr. Raphael reassured her. "That can happen, but it's important to remember that disappointing others is sometimes inevitable. What really matters is that you don't disappoint yourself. Life is made up of choices, Diva, and each choice involves giving up something. Saying no is choosing to prioritize what's most important to you." He then suggested a new exercise. "This week I want you to say no to at least 3 requests. It can be something simple, but try to apply what we practiced. Then record how you felt and what happened." Diva left the office with a mix of determination and apprehension. There would be 3 challenges that would test not only her ability to say no, but also her emotional resilience. The first test came the very next day. A friend called asking for help organizing a last-minute event. Diva, who had already planned a quiet evening for herself, felt the old urge to say yes and commit. But remembering Dr. Raphael's words, she replied, "I would love to help, but I already have another commitment." She wasn't lying. The commitment was to herself. To her surprise, her friend accepted her answer without insisting. After hanging up, Diva felt a mix of relief and unease. She spent the rest of the evening analyzing what had happened, but realized that she was proud of having prioritized her own needs. The second challenge was more difficult. At work, her boss asked her to stay late to review a document that was due the next day. Diva hesitated. The fear of appearing uncommitted almost made her give in, but she remembered the exercise. "I would love to stay, but I already have commitments outside of work today. Can I review this tomorrow morning?" The boss agreed without protest. On the way home, Diva realized that the world had not fallen apart because of her refusal. It was as if each no was removing a brick from a wall that she had built throughout her life. The third test was the most unexpected. During a family lunch, her sister asked Diva to organize a party for her nephew's birthday. It was the kind of request she would never have refused before, but this time Diva responded, "I would love to help, but I'm very busy at work. Is there any way I can contribute, such as suggesting ideas or helping financially?" The response was not well received. Her sister expressed her displeasure, saying that she could always count on her and that she was disappointed. Diva felt the impact of the rejection, but at the same time she realized that it was not her responsibility to assume the role of savior in every situation. In the next session, Diva shared all of her experiences with Dr. Raphael. He congratulated her on her progress and highlighted that the third situation was particularly important. "Diva, you experienced something fundamental, that not everyone will accept your limits calmly, but that does not mean that you are wrong. On the contrary, it is a sign that you are beginning to put your own interests first." As Diva continued to practice, she noticed changes not only in her routine, but also in how she was perceived by the people around her. Her more assertive posture made her more respected at work and at home. She discovered that saying no not only freed her, but also helped her to say yes with more intention and authenticity. Diva began to enjoy leisure time, prioritize her health, and above all, reconnect with who she really was. The transformation was profound. From a woman who was always available to others, she became someone who was also available to herself. If you wish, I can expand on the next chapters or delve deeper into a specific aspect of Diva's transformation. Diva walked into Dr. Raphael's office with a new sparkle in her eyes. After the last few weeks of practice, she was beginning to experience something she hadn't felt in a long time: control. But even so, there were issues that still bothered her deeply. "Doctor, I'm starting to say no, but it's not easy. Sometimes people don't take it well, and it still affects me. It's like I'm breaking an invisible rule that I've always followed," she said, fixing her hair with a nervous gesture. Dr. Raphael smiled, acknowledging his patient's progress. "Diva, learning to say no isn't just about changing words, it's about changing a dynamic that you've cultivated your entire life. The people around you are used to the version of you that always says yes. It's natural for some to resist change." He continued, explaining, "The good news is that you're on the right track. What you're feeling right now is part of the process. Don't expect everything to fall into place perfectly and immediately. It takes time." Diva listened intently, but still seemed concerned. "How can I deal with these reactions? When my sister got upset, for example, it consumed me for days. I wondered if I should have given in." Dr. Raphael knew this was the perfect opportunity to introduce a powerful technique, the empathetic no. He explained, Diva, it's important to remember that no doesn't have to be harsh or cold. You can say no while validating the other person's feelings. This can soften the blow while still keeping your boundaries intact. He suggested she say something like, "I understand how important this is to you, and I would like to help. But right now, I can't take on that responsibility. Can we come up with another solution together?" Diva seemed intrigued, but still a little hesitant. "Do you think this could really work? What if the person keeps insisting?" "If that happens," Dr. Raphael replied firmly, "reiterate your position calmly, but without giving in. Something like, 'I really understand, but I can't do this right now.' It's important that you don't justify your decision too much, because that can open the door for insistence." Diva accepted the challenge. Over the next few weeks, she practiced not empathizing in several situations. One of them was with her sister again, when she insisted that Diva help with another family event. Diva applied what she had learned. She acknowledged her sister's feelings, stood her ground firmly, and, instead of taking all the responsibility, suggested alternatives. The response wasn't perfect. Her sister still expressed dissatisfaction, but this time, Diva didn't let herself be consumed by guilt. Instead, she reflected on how she felt more authentic, more connected to her own limits. As Diva gained confidence in setting boundaries, she began to notice significant changes in her life. At work, her colleagues became more respectful of her time and decisions. Requests that had previously been made casually began to filter through, as those around her realized she was no longer the same person who accepted everything without question. But the biggest change occurred within herself. Diva began to enjoy something that had seemed out of reach for years. Time. Time to take care of herself. Time to relax. Time to simply do nothing. Before, her life had been a constant race to please others. Now, she began to fill her days with things that made her happy. In one of the following sessions, Diva shared something that caught Dr. Raphael's attention. "Doctor, I realize that by saying no, I am not only protecting my time, but also appreciating the moments when I actually say yes." Dr. Raphael smiled, pleased with her insight. "That's very important, Diva. When you say yes only to what really matters, that yes becomes much more powerful. People feel the authenticity behind it." She began to apply this principle to her closest relationships. Instead of accepting invitations out of obligation, Diva began to carefully choose the moments when she wanted to be present. When she met with friends, she was more relaxed, more connected, and, to her surprise, the people around her began to respect her presence even more. But the most profound impact was on her relationship with herself. Diva began to see the value of her own needs and desires. She realized that prioritizing herself was not selfish, but a way of taking care of herself, of respecting herself. In her last session with Dr. Raphael, Diva reflected on her journey. "Doctor, when I first came here, I thought the idea of saying no without feeling guilty was impossible. Now I realize that I was the one who was putting myself in this prison." Dr. Raphael agreed. "You've come an incredible way, Diva. Learning to say no is actually learning to say yes to what really matters. Your happiness, your time, your health." She left his office that morning with a feeling of lightness she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, Diva was in control of her own life, and more importantly, she was certain that saying no was not an act of rejecting the world, but of embracing herself.